The importance of the eucalypts is, on multiple levels, really, on a daily occurrence. The eucalypts were used to represent the people, the community, because there's so many varieties of people and so many varieties of eucalypts that, it makes sense.
The kurong is our name for canoe in language, and where we've actually cut it today is the most highly significant gathering place on Wurundjeri country. The landscape now called the Heidelberg Flats, where the Birrarung, the Yarra River, flows through, traditionally is called Waringal, which means the spirit of dingo. The lagoon area here, Bolan Bolan in language, means many lagoons. Only 10-minute walk to the north of us was the gathering place where up to 500 people would gather together when the eels run down the river and through the lagoons, and that's when the big ceremonies occurred. And that would have been one joyful occasion. So I'm always happy to be in this place, because this was a happy place for our people. The kurong practically was used in lagoon country like we're in. You may take it out on the river, but I wouldn't. In my knowledge of canoes, we had two styles. We had the red gum, which is quite a flat base piece of bark with the walls curled up and the bow and the stern slightly above the water. Very good for still water. The more sturdier canoe had more of a rib frame inserted into it, and it was made out of stringy bark tree. So the stringy barks are actually bound at both ends. They're a little bit more sturdy, a little bit more high walled, and they're the ones you take out on areas of a high water flow or rivers or anything like that. So yeah. So the one we cut today is more of a lagoon or still water canoe. Hopefully in the near future we'll make a stringy bark. Eucalyptus trees are that important to us. We're actually named after one of them. The managum, as it's called today. The term Wurundjeri, Wurrun is managum. Jerry's the grub that lives in the bark of that tree. So our old people named themselves after that tree. So obviously it had a very high value to them. Today it's very important and very, I suppose, spiritual strengthening, having the younger generation here as well, who are learning and being part of the actual process of getting up and removing the bark and learning about this. So they'll gain that knowledge. Eventually they'll pass that on to their kids, but in the meantime, it makes them feel better about who they are as Wurundjeri or Aboriginal people. Because if you're an Aboriginal person and you don't know your story, and what I mean by story, your history, your culture, your country, you are very much a lost individual. So by participating in cultural practice, it has many benefits. We're all out there, together, which we don't do a lot as much as we would like to. And we're also practicing who we are. Because to me, if you're not practicing something, you've got to question how healthy it is or even whether it's still viable or even alive. You got it? Yeah.
My canoe's not looking much of a canoe that would float, and that's certainly the extra layers that I put into my work. So this particular canoe is made of a rusted old security door, has this gorgeous diamond-shaped patterns in it, and so it obviously doesn't hold water, and many people would say, well, that's not a great canoe Lorraine's made, you know, this is not even going to hold water. But it's that whole powerful extra layers that we get people to have these kind of thinking processes or thoughts and conversations about such a thing. For the kind of work that I do, I want people to know that, you know, I'm doing my bit to clean up country. In this instance, it's been burnt. It's a house that's been burnt down, but it's still left as rubbish. It's burnt rubbish. I want people to stand in front of that and imagine that they can see in real life a 5 metre wide tree and the first 2.5 metres from the ground up. I'm wanting people to think about not only the species, but how old that species is, how long it's been around, how we perhaps don't respect trees enough, let alone the river red gum tree. If a tree could talk, what it would tell us about Aboriginal Australia and what's gone on below its limbs. You don't realise how big they are when you're a little child, and you're playing in amongst the soil that the trees anchored in, and we're bringing up out of that ground, playing in the ground as if we were playing in a sand pit. But we would bring up things like axe heads and things like that, and our father would say, we'd say, what is that? And our father would say, just put that back, you know, just put that back where it belongs. And we didn't realise that, and when you become a teenager, you ask more questions about that and still going out to these places. But as an adult, you realise how magical these trees are, not just anchored in country, but what they host, what they hold, what knowledge they have witnessed on that ground where we played, what has gone on before that, within its trunk, you know, for example, birthing taking place, storing of foods. So in an exhibition like this, I want to share how we as Aboriginal people utilise the tree, those objects that I've certainly made to complement the actual tree section of the tree trunk, is educating people about how Aboriginal people have been able to live within the environment, complemented the environment. You know, to be able to scar a tree and take what you need, only what you need, and scar it, but not kill it. And then other cultures of mine have simply ring-barked a tree and killed it. So it's an interesting take on things and how we go about things in different cultures, but how we can learn, cultures can learn from each other.
To be able to continue to do the things that my ancestors did today, you know, it's incredibly empowering, and it makes me feel stronger about what we do. And you know, it's hard. You're living in a pretty urban environment, you know, and in a house, you know, like anyone else paying mortgage, and you got plasma TVs and digital this, that, and the other things, and you really have to fight to practice culture, you know, and you have to make time and you have to make space. And, you know, a lot of this stuff that's sitting here today doesn't really fit into this home. You know, it's a bit of a contrast, but it's important to me that it's here because I'm probably more connected to that than I am to this. I remember still how shocked I was the first time that I did it. And I'd worked with wood plenty of times before that, but I never got that feeling. But once you get a bit of wood and you're going back to the basics, back to the way the old people did it with the stone tool, and you start to go through that process. I remember just stopping for a second, the first boomerang that I made, and just had this realisation that I'd almost been in a trance for 25 minutes, half an hour, and that time went in a second, you know, and I didn't hear anything, you know. It was like you see in some of the movies sometimes where, you know, this intense moment happens and all the sound just drops out. Really all I was doing was, you know, dragging a stone tool up and down a boomerang. and just something about, making sure the tool, finding the sweet spot in the tool itself. So I think I'm, tapping into something that's bigger than me, that this is a human thing, this is a Aboriginal thing, this is what Bunurong people have been doing for 40,000 years. So, of course, you can tap into that. The snake, I sort of just saw that form on a tree. Most people go, oh, yeah, that looks like a snake, that's interesting. It is, on the surface, that's what it is, but, it's beyond important to me. We were working on an archaeological site, and every day the community sort of would go and have lunch under one tree. That tree was, it's 8 or 9 metres around the girth of the trunk. And it's, I'm no arborist, but I would say that tree would be well over 300 years old. And so we would sit there every day, and the site that we were excavating was incredibly important. It was 50 metres away from this tree. And I think we'd worked there for, near on a year, and had found, a hearth complex, which is basically campfires. And there was a lot of archaeology associated with those hearths. And we're getting, hundreds of artefacts in a very small space, and sometimes thousands of artefacts in, a space no bigger than this room. And that site basically went down in layers back, so the top stuff was, in the last couple of thousand years. And down at the deeper sections on the second site that we did, we were getting down into a coffee rock layer, which was, around 20,000 years old. It's a multi-layered occupation site, and it was a big sand dune that sat along the edge of the old Karam swamp. It just became an important tree, for that job. I just spotted a branch that was hanging down from this big old euc that it just looked like a snake to me, all the right bends in all the right places. And so, that snake's important to me now because, this is a piece of wood from a tree that sat there in that spot for, I would say over 300 years, and that tree is still alive today. It's seen all of Melbourne, build up around it. And, it was there when this was all just bush. So it's a tangible part of, connected to our old people and to that place. As well as before that, it would have been a seedling from another tree in that, nearby area that was once a part of a big red gum forest that stretched for 50 to 80 kilometres wide. So it's connected on, multiple levels to that space and our culture. For just a little bit of wood that, it's got a few bends in it, it's, I'd be devastated if I ever lost that piece of wood. And, it doesn't look like much, but its importance is through the roof. I'd probably even get emotional talking about it, I think most Bunurong people share that kind of connection to not only that tree or, to what we do with this stuff, but to all of those sort of things in the landscape, those tangible, real, physical objects that you can touch and say, well, my old people were here. Yeah, these trees are, we got a few left that were, remnant trees from that forest that was initially recorded by early settlers to that area. And, now they're sort of dead trees that are in paddocks, and most of it's been built around. Most of those trees have been removed, which, makes the few that are left incredibly important. They're, 500-year-old trees that are still standing in their initial position. They haven't been moved or relocated. And they've just got this grey, dry look to the trunks. And, we've come across people that would be just as happy to cut them down. To me, when I drive past these trees today, or when I'm lucky enough to be able to approach them and, put my hand on them, it's an incredible feeling. They're so amazingly special and important. for that reason, that, you know, most of the physical and tangible things that connect us today to our culture then, you know, to our old people, I should say, are gone. When we come across something that is still there, that, you know, you can stand right next to and know that, you know, if it's been modified culturally, that maybe it's been scarred for a bowl or a shield or bark for a hut, you know you're standing in that same spot. Even the ones that aren't modified, you know, the ones that are just a big old dead river red gum. The form is just beautiful, you know, all the bends and twists, and once they've been dead a couple of 100 years, to me they're still, it's not that they're as beautiful, they're probably more beautiful, but in a whole different way, you know. It just speaks to me, you know, I would struggle most times to put words to a lot of this stuff, you know, that it's really hard to write about, it's really hard to speak about, because it's almost like the English language doesn't really allow for enough meaning to really put it across in a way that would make you go, okay, I see what you're saying now, wow, that's really powerful. And because it's mostly feelings, you know, trying to put words to that stuff, it never does it justice. You always walk away thinking, you know, they still don't get it because I can't find the words to explain it in a way like I feel it. And but, you know, we've had plenty of meetings around those trees with you know, developers and that want to build roads or stuff through them, and you know, you get so emotional. You're defending these things with everything that you've got, you know, and you're speaking for people that can't speak for themselves anymore because they're not here. Yeah, I don't think people value that kind of tree. You know, they think, oh, it's dangerous. It's, you know, it's not as strong anymore. Its roots are rotting, or it's got to come down. But a lot of animals are living in these trees too. So they're a habitat of their own, you know, and important for that reason. You know, we've got biodiversity issues all over the place. And I think this is some of that reason why, is we keep seeing something that doesn't have a purpose today, you know, under the terms, under the way we live. So we get rid of it, you know, whether it's a swamp or a dead tree or, you know, yeah.